If we haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, I just want you to know my name is Jeff. I have a face made for radio, but thank you, Jen. I do appreciate what you tried to do earlier. I actually talk a lot. I talk a lot for a living. That's what I do. I have for a while now. In fact, 50 years ago this year, I read my first commercials on the radio. And my friends and my family will tell you I haven't shut up since. I've been in advertising since Tony the Tiger was a kitten. After college, I worked in radio and TV for a number of years, and then I switched career paths to something I thought I never wanted to do, to something I never thought I could do. I became a teacher. As a prof in the business faculty at Georgian College, I help students learn to create marketing strategies, advertising ideas. I teach them about great communication and about the power of persuasion. As a Christian, I hope to help them understand something a little more. Not just how to do something or even how to be someone, but how to become someone who can make a positive difference in this world. I'm here today to share a bit of one of the lessons which I've been teaching for many years, but honestly, only recently did I myself discern from this lesson an incredible truth. That the one person who best embodied the meaning behind the lesson is actually Jesus. I want to help you see that truth today. In a nutshell, I'm here to talk about three little words. No, not start the car, or where's the beef, or it's magically delicious. In fact, these three words are quite possibly three words you've never heard before. They're actually thousands of years old and may all seem like Greek to you. But they are going to mean something by the end of this talk. They'll perhaps change the way you look at life, change the way you interact with other people. But first, speaking of words, I want you to think about something, or more accurately, someone, and see if you can tell me who wrote these words. When you think about this quote, who do you think wrote it? A man? A woman? Maybe a teacher, a preacher? A motivational speaker? A sports coach? Who could take such a simple truth and turn it into such a powerful motivational phrase? How about these? Abraham Lincoln? Confucius? Oprah? Winston Churchill? Could it be Dr. Phil? Or these? Well, in case you don't know, it was a woman, a blind, deaf woman. Helen Keller went deaf and blind at 19 months of age after an undiagnosed illness, probably meningitis or rubella. Just imagine growing up in a lightless, soundless world. Her parents sought help and ended up contacting a young woman named Anne Sullivan, who would stay with Helen as friend, confidant, and teacher for 49 years until her death. She taught Helen to communicate through a custom touch language in which she tapped signals into the palm of Helen's hand, taught her how to read and produce braille and print by typewriter. Helen Keller was the first deaf and blind woman ever to graduate from university. She also became renowned worldwide as a champion of social justice. She was a celebrity recognized by millions around the globe then and even today. Her intelligence and perception speak to so many people, blind or sighted, deaf or hearing, regardless of boundaries. But what was it deep within her that created the motivation to reach out and change the hearts of others? What was it that allowed a blind woman to see life so clearly, a deaf woman to speak so powerfully? What gave her such incredible power to persuade? In the mid-4th century, 400 years before Christ, Socrates became one of the first and most famous philosophers and teachers of ancient Greece. And he laid out 3 rules or tenets of persuasion. He said to change someone's mind or to reinforce someone's opinion, to persuade someone, you must employ 3 things in your talk. First of all, ethos. Ethos is the character and behavior of the speaker, which influences their persuasive ability. In a nutshell, Does the speaker walk the talk? Secondly, pathos. Pathos is the root of the English words pathetic and sympathetic, which in its original meaning basically meant from the heart. Pathos puts the audience into a specific frame of mind to effectively receive the persuasion. This involves using passion and emotional appeal. And finally, logos. Reason, logic, data, facts must be included if you're to effectively persuade others. Ethos, pathos, logos. Let's talk about each of those. Ethos. What is ethos? In English, we get the word ethics from the Greek word ethos. Ethics are often defined as the moral principles that define a person's behavior. Dr. David Jeremiah, in his book, The Jesus You May Not Know, shares this story of a math teacher named Jim O'Connor. This man was a no-nonsense algebra teacher to a bunch of high school-age boys, and he was tough. A veteran of the Vietnam War, he was a teacher who thought it would be nice if school could be fun, but he didn't think school was about fun. He was trying to train and educate young men and train them how to be better and more successful. A senior educator in his school told others that until people get used to Jim, they think he's really mean. One day, Jim sent his class to a kids' hospital in LA to help them recruit blood donors for a blood drive that they were organizing as a class community project. When the boys mentioned where they went to school, they heard things from hospital staffers like, "Wow, you must know Jim O'Connor. Isn't he great?" The boys were stunned. They didn't think he was great at all. They just thought he was a mean old man. Well, they began to say that they might not really know the man very well because they saw, displayed in the main hallway, a huge plaque. And it had the biggest all-time donors of blood to this children's hospital. Jim O'Connor's name was right on top. Since 1989, he had donated over 72 gallons of blood and platelets, saving who knows how many children's lives. The boys also learned that Jim O'Connor, never married, no children, volunteered 3 days a week at the hospital to hold and rock sick and dying kids whose parents couldn't be there. He said he just couldn't stand to see them alone at that time. Now, his students began to see Jim in a whole new light. One of his students is quoted as saying, "I not only respect him, I want to be like him." Dr. Jeremiah closes his story with, "The most effective teachers are those who teach and model the truth." Jesus was called a teacher or rabbi by many of his time, even his enemies. He stated, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And in his life, he modeled everything that he taught. He taught that we should love our neighbors and spent his short ministry healing lepers, the blind, the mentally ill, feeding the hungry, and feeding the lost with the gospel of love, sharing, and forgiveness. He even showed us how to love our enemies. The land of Samaria, just a few miles from Jerusalem. Jews hated the Samaritans. They would even walk around the land of Samaria rather than cross through it. They despised Samaritans, but Jesus didn't. He went there and he preached to them. He even used the Good Samaritan as a central figure in one of his most powerful parables. Jesus prayed for the religious elite who ridiculed him and persecuted him, and for the Roman soldiers as they crucified him. He taught that in humility we should value others above ourselves. And then God's Son, the King of Kings, knelt down and washed the dirty, dusty, tired feet of his disciples. He taught that greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for his friends. And then hours later, he would quietly surrender himself to horrible torture and death for those same disciples and for you and me. Ethos is persuading through your character, reinforcing what you tell others, proving and modeling what you say in your everyday life. Jesus is the personification of God's ethos. There was a song in 1984 by a band called Foreigner. It went something like this: "I want to know what love is. I want you to show me." Jesus showed us what love is. Read the stories of Jesus in the Bible. Study his words. Look at the people he touched. An ancient Chinese philosopher said, "Tell me, I'll forget. Show me, I might remember. Involve me, I'll never forget." Jesus knew that. Jesus told us, showed us, and asked us to get involved and follow him. 12 disciples answered his call. They left everything behind, walked by his side, lived with him, heard every word that he spoke. They saw and experienced every miracle, and all of them, except Judas Iscariot, eventually lived out the last days of their lives, telling everyone they met, even at the cost of their lives, that Jesus was the Son of God and that he lives. 1900 years after Christ, Teddy Roosevelt said this: "Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care." Here's a word that we use a lot, especially in church. The word worship comes from the Old English word worthship. At the core of that word, the notion of worth or worthiness, suggesting that our worship should only be directed to the person who is truly worthy. Dubbed the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley didn't actually appreciate the title. One fan unrolled a banner at one of his concerts that said, "Elvis is the king," and Presley quickly corrected them and announced, "There's only one king, and that is Jesus Christ." Many people may be worthy of our thanks, our respect, our gratitude, but only one is worthy of our worship. Jesus demonstrated that worth and his kingdom in every word he spoke, every miracle he performed, every sinner he loved, every sinner he forgave. Jesus displayed the perfect ethos of a loving God. Now, pathos. Pathos is persuading with the power of emotion, touching and persuading others with words, phrases, stories, things that stir the soul. Sometimes sorrow, sometimes laughter, sometimes anger, sometimes vengeance, sometimes resentment. But the greatest of these is love. Love is mentioned 686 times in the New International Version of the Bible. In the New Testament, it is recorded that Jesus personally said the word love 51 times. Jesus preached about love specifically 13 times. Here's an excerpt from one of those times, which we know as the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 43, 44. "You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Dr. Martin Luther King encouraged his people to fight for their civil rights with the weapon of love. He knew that Jesus said to turn the other cheek, and that in the words of Gandhi, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. In 1963, when Dr. King told the world, "I have a dream," from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he said this: "But there is something that I must say to my people. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force." We so badly need the persuasive power of Dr. Martin Luther King's equality, peace, and love for Christ in this world today. Pastor Ruttan wrote these words in his first book, Up. "The teachings of Jesus offer the most hope for the world and its future." Just imagine the impact of applying Jesus' teachings today. Here's a great example of love and pathos from Jesus. Read the first 11 verses of John chapter 8 with me. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Now go and leave your life of sin." That's powerful. That's pathos. We have something to get excited about in the stories and life of Jesus Christ. Now, Logos. Here's some interesting data. A recent Gallup poll revealed that 10% of Americans do not believe that man has landed on the moon. That means roughly the population of Canada, 33 million people in America, believe they have been lied to about Neil Armstrong and that July 20th, 1969 was nothing more than a fake Hollywood production. According to another poll taken recently, around 2% of Americans believe the Earth is flat. On top of that, 5% of those surveyed have always thought the world was round, but now they have doubts. So despite the fact there are people worshiping God right now all around the world, that every scientist, every astronomer, every aviator, every astronaut knows that the Earth is round, and a billion pictures or videos have clearly demonstrated the Earth is a globe like every other planet in the universe, they believe the Earth is flat. The truth is not their truth. It doesn't fit what they've been told or allow themselves to believe. Logos is where we get our English word logic or logical. To philosophers, it is defined as the rational principle that governs and develops the universe. Hence, if it adds up and makes sense, it is logical. 1 and 1 equals 2. Therefore, 2 minus 1 must equal 1. That just makes sense. It's rational. It's practical. It's proven. It's true. About 500 years later, the Apostle John retweaked the definition of Logos to help explain Jesus. John called him the personification of Logos, the Word of God, and therefore truth itself. The first words in the book of John tell us this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John 14:6, Jesus stated, I am the way and the truth and the life. Jesus is not my truth or your truth. In fact, Jesus doesn't even say he's telling the truth. He said that he is the truth. In John 8:31-32, it reads this: to the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In a recent sermon, Pastor Matthew spoke of the tenuous state of truth today. He said, we live our lives based on what we think is true. For example, if I think it's true that it's going to rain, then I'm going to grab an umbrella when I go outside. If I don't think it's going to rain, I won't. If I think it's true my child is about to get hit by a car, I'm going to quickly pull him to safety. If I don't believe it, I won't. We must confidently stand firm on the trustworthy words of Jesus. He doesn't allow for relativity. Instead, he tells it like it is. He wants the best for us. Loving people are honest with people they love. That's why Jesus tells us the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Toward the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7, Jesus says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. If I think that is true, then I'd better live my life accordingly. Recently, I was listening to a speaker talking about the proof of prophecy in the Bible. He pointed out that Isaiah 9 says the promised child would establish an eternal kingdom. Isaiah 7 says he'd be born of a virgin. Psalm 72 says the promised one would be worshipped by shepherds and kings. Micah chapter 5 says that the promised one would be born in Bethlehem. In the Old Testament, there are more than 61 major prophecies about the life of Jesus Christ, written 500 to 4,000 years before he was born. This man says that scientists compute the statistical probability of just 7 or 8 of those prophecies coming true in one person is 1 in 10 to the power of 17. In English, that's 100,000 trillion. The odds of these prophecies actually happening are the same as if you covered an area the size of Texas, 2 feet deep in silver dollars, marked one of them with an X, and then sent a blindfolded person out to find the marked silver dollar. As we worship and learn more about the incredible gifts of grace, forgiveness, joy, peace, and life under everlasting that we've been offered, remember that God's plan for us through his promised Son is, against all odds, very real and totally rational. It is the truth, logos. Jesus, the Word, was and is truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. God is light, and Jesus became the light of the world. He shines so we don't have to walk in darkness, but we'll have the light of life. In fact, the more you study and learn about Jesus, the more convinced you'll be that Jesus Christ was the very expression of ethos, pathos, and logos. His persuasive power is unparalleled in all of history. His life without sin, his unconditional love and forgiveness for absolutely everyone who asked for mercy, his incredible consistency between what he said and what he did. It's classic ethos. Jesus' love for his disciples, his compassion for the lost and lonely, his patience with a frightened man who would deny that he even knew him 3 times on the night of Jesus' crucifixion. His righteous anger at those who had perverted God's temple absolutely tugs at the heart and creates pathos, an emotional response from any reader or listener. His message that God is love and to love one another, his amazing logical answers to life's most difficult questions, his flawless knowledge of the scriptures, that is the epitome of logos. His incredible parables and unforgettable stories persuaded so many throughout history that he was not just telling the truth. He is the truth. He is the Messiah, the living Son of God. Jesus had 3 short years of ministry to persuade his disciples to give up everything, to go into all the world and persuade the people of their time that he was the way, the truth, and the life. Now you and I can confidently state, I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. Absolutely persuaded by Jesus. Amen.
To him.